We think inflation is normal. A little rise here, a small price jump there. But when governments lose control or choose not to control it, money doesn't just lose value, it dies. And history shows exactly what happens next.
Okay, let's get into this. We are, I think, stepping into a territory that for most people feels like something from old history books, the kind of thing you assume can't happen again.
Exactly. But the sources we've gathered for you today, they suggest that this isn't just history, it's a playbook. And it might have some uh, pretty terrifying and immediate implications for right now.
Which means we have to start with a fundamental question. When does high inflation stop being just, an economic problem and become something else? When does it become a deliberate strategy?
That's the core of it. We are doing a deep dive into hyperinflation. And you're right, we have to redefine what that word even means for this discussion. This isn't your price of milk going up 5–10%.
No.
This is about the very idea of money collapsing visibly, so fast that the entire fabric of society starts to, well, come apart at the seams.
And our mission for you, the listener, is to really act as your guides through this pretty unsettling material. The sources you gave us they're exhaustive. They get into the raw mechanics of it all.
They do, and they focus heavily on historical case studies. We're talking post-World War I Europe, the build-up to the 1929 crash.
And then, and this is the uncomfortable part, they draw a straight line from that past right to our current global financial system. So we really need to unpack the mechanism, understand the history, and then look at what it all means for you.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
I think a good place to start is just a quick technical baseline. We have to be really clear on the difference between the inflation we hear about every day, that gradual loss of purchasing power, and hyperinflation.
Right. Where's the line?
The sources draw a very clear one. Hyperinflation is the point where inflation and, this is the key part, the growth of the money supply start to spiral. They hit a point where it's completely out of control. It can't be stopped.
An irreversible velocity. And the mechanism they describe is, honestly, it's terrifying because it just feeds on itself. It's this engine of its own destruction. They call it the debt spiral.
Yes, the debt spiral. And the source lays it out in really cold, hard terms. It works like this. A nation's debt gets so big it can't be paid back through taxes. So what do?
They take out new loans.
Exactly. But, and here's the twist, the new credits are only taken out to pay the interest on the old credits.
Wow. So you're just borrowing to pay the interest on your borrowing.
Which means you have to create more and more money exponentially just to stand still. And that act of creation is what accelerates the devaluation of all the money that already exists.
So it's not a slow leak anymore. It's a velocity problem. The currency is losing value faster than the economy can even react. It's the ultimate feedback loop. The solution just makes the problem worse, faster.
That's it. And when that velocity hits what you could call critical mass, the effects are immediate. The source says the value of money falls so quickly you can literally watch it happen.
They use a really powerful image for that. A whirlpool, right? A strudel, I think was the word.
Yes. A whirlpool that just pulls everything down in the blink of an eye. It's not a gentle slope, it's a cliff. An exponential collapse.
That perfectly sets the stage for what is, I think, the most unsettling claim in all this material. That this whirlpool isn't always an accident. There's agency behind it.
Which brings us straight to part one. The sovereign strategy. Debt erasure by design.
Right. So we're moving from economic theory to, what, political calculation?
Exactly. The central claim is that hyperinflation isn't just mismanagement. It's a tool. A deliberate instrument used by governments that are drowning in debt.
That's a huge claim. To say it's a tool, not a mistake. What's the logic there? What evidence does the source give that this was a conscious choice?
It's all based on the math of a sovereign default. If a government creates so much paper money that the currency itself becomes worthless, what happens to its debts?
They become worthless too.
They effectively become null. The debts, especially the ones owed to private banks and bondholders, are wiped out. It's a default, but it's a default by dilution, not declaration.
A zero-sum game, but you're zeroing out the entire currency to win.
For the state, it's the ultimate reset button. It lets them erase unpayable debts, clear the books, and start the whole game over again, usually with a brand new currency. And the source is clear. This has happened again and again in modern history.
Especially, it says, when states owe massive debts to private banks.
Yes. And the source makes a really interesting and provocative distinction about which kind of government gets to use this tool. It contrasts democracies and dictatorships.
How so?
Well, the source claims that a really powerful state, maybe a dictatorship, could just choose to disempower the banks, directly. Nationalize them or just cancel the debt by decree.
A more direct approach.
Right. But it argues that democracies are often too weak or too tied into those same financial interests to take such an aggressive step.
So for them, the only politically realistic way to default is
The hyperinflationary route. It's a sort of slow, state-sanctioned financial suicide that pushes the entire cost onto the citizens, not the banks.
which brings us right to the textbook case study, Weimar Germany in the 1920s. The sources are absolutely adamant that this was a deliberate strategy.
You have to remember the context. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles forced Germany and Austria to pay just astronomical sums in reparations to the victors.
Sums they had no possible way of ever paying.
Not even close. Germany was already dealing with mass poverty, hunger, unemployment. The country was devastated. The Weimar Republic couldn't even feed its own people, let alone pay off debts that were multiples of their entire economy.
So they were trapped.
And the source material claims, without any ambiguity, that the Republic consciously chose the path of hyperinflation to get out of that trap. The calculation was brutal. Destroy our currency to destroy our debt.
And they did it by just printing money.
Endlessly. They called it the paper mark. They used the old imperial printing machines and just ran them 204/7 until the machines themselves literally broke down from overuse.
That is an incredible image, and the results were almost immediate.
Staggering. The exchange rate to the US dollar just went into the stratosphere. It went from something like 4,200 marks per dollar in early 1922 to 4 trillion marks per dollar by the end of 1923.
4 trillion.
This wasn't a decline. This was, as the source puts it, strategic self-immolation of a currency to save the state's balance sheet.
That political side is crucial, but once that decision is made, what does it actually feel like for the person on the street? It's one thing to hear prices doubled every 4 days, but that's an abstract number. We need to get into the human side of this.
Yes, that's part 2, living in the whirlpool. Because the numbers from Germany and Austria in 22 and 23 are, they're genuinely hard to comprehend if you live in a stable system.
Okay, let's start with Germany, the epicenter.
In Germany, the average monthly inflation hits something like 30,000%.
Per month.
1,000%.
To put that in human terms, prices were doubling, on average every 4 days. Think about that. You go to sleep on Monday, and by Friday, the money in your pocket is worth half what it was. It's not hardship, it's financial evaporation. And Austria was supposedly the modest example.
Right, modest. Their inflation was running at 1,733% per month. By the summer of 1922, prices were already 14,000 times higher than they were before the war in 1914.
Which means the money itself had to become absurd.
Completely. The largest banknote in Austria got up to 500,000 kronen. The currency, the krone, it became a running joke.
But it's the anecdotes, the human stories, that really bring it home. They show the total loss of faith in money. Let's start with that one about the 2 beers. It just captures the speed of it all.
It's probably the most famous story from the era because it perfectly encapsulates how people had to think. The joke was, if you went into a bar, you should always order 2 beers at once.
Why?
Because the risk of the second beer getting a little warm was nothing compared to the certainty that if you waited half an hour to order it, the price would have doubled.
Money was losing value faster than beer loses its chill.
Exactly. And then there's just the physical problem of trying to buy things.
The wheelbarrow.
The famous image. People needed wheelbarrows, suitcases, laundry baskets full of bundled banknotes just to go buy a loaf of bread at the bakery. It highlights the total absurdity of it. The effort required to carry the money was more than the effort to carry the thing you were buying.
And what about the psychological toll, the way it just normalizes insanity? You have that observation from the novelist Thomas Mann.
Oh, that's a profound one. Mann wrote about watching a market woman. She was selling her goods, and she could ask for, say, 100 million marks for a single egg without even blinking. No emotion, no surprise.
Because it was normal.
His observation was that she had lost the ability to be shocked by anything. When the baseline of reality is that absurd and it changes every hour, you lose the capacity for surprise. And maybe, the capacity for hope, too.
And to try and combat this, the whole rhythm of daily life, of work, had to change. It became this frantic sprint.
Twice a day. People were paid twice a day. The schedule was relentless. You'd get your first payment, and the workers would literally run home so their wives could grab the cash and run to the shops.
Immediately.
To buy meat, bread, coal, anything tangible before the money became worthless by the afternoon. If you waited an hour, your pay could be worth 10, 20% less. You were in a literal race against devaluation just to eat.
Which leads to the final tragic symbol of it all, the stove incident, the moment paper currency loses all meaning.
Yeah, the sources recount this horrifying image. It's the middle of winter, people are freezing, and they're heating their tiled stoves, not with wood or coal, but with bundles of banknotes.
Because it was cheaper.
It was cheaper to burn the money than to buy fuel with it. The paper itself was a better source of heat than the commodity it was supposed to represent. When you're burning your money for warmth, that's the end. That's the total collapse of trust.
But an era like that, as awful as it was, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. The sources are really clear that the stage for this chaos was set years earlier by global policy changes.
Which takes us to part 3, the preconditions and the crash. You have to zoom out. You have to look at the global monetary system that allowed this to happen. And the starting point, according to this material, is the widespread abandonment of the gold standard around World War I.
And after the war, the U.S. Federal Reserve became a huge player in this new environment.
A massive player. The Fed printed enormous amounts of paper money, both during and after the war. They just flooded the global markets with cash, creating this incredible level of liquidity everywhere.
And that's the critical link, isn't it? The lack of an anchor.
Once you abandon the gold backing, that hard anchor that limits how much a government can spend monetary policy everywhere, it spirals out of control. Banks were suddenly swimming in cash that they could create, essentially, from nothing under the new fractional reserve system.
And all that cheap money had to go somewhere. It went straight into the roaring 20s bubble.
It did. Banks had all this cash, so they offered incredibly cheap credit to their customers. And those customers, looking for easy money, plowed it straight into the stock market.
Which created the speculative frenzy.
Exactly. Stocks soared, which encouraged people to borrow even more money, often on margin, to buy more stocks, which drove the prices even higher. It wasn't based on value anymore. It was pure momentum, fueled by cheap, limitless credit.
And connecting this to the U.S. experience, it was a time of huge change. Cars, consumerism, women getting the right to vote.
Yes, but the source points out the great irony of the era. It was also the era of prohibition. And prohibition created this massive, unregulated black market that fueled the rise of organized crime. So even as society was progressing in some ways, financial and social order was dissolving in others.
And power was becoming incredibly concentrated.
Hugely. The source points to the Rockefeller family, who controlled oil, the single most important raw material of the new industrial age. The wealth gap was enormous, even if it was hidden under this veneer of a party that would never end.
But every bubble built on credit and speculation has to burst. And this is where the source makes its second really big provocative claim. The crash wasn't an accident, it was steered.
The material is very direct about this. It claims that bubbles of this magnitude don't just pop randomly. It says they can be, and often are, steered or managed to trigger a massive transfer of wealth.
What does that mean, steered?
The implication is that major financial players can see the crash coming, and they can even influence the timing, maybe through a sudden hike in interest rates or by making coordinated margin calls, things that prick the bubble at a moment that is most advantageous for them.
And that moment arrived on October 24th, 1929. Black Thursday, or Black Friday in Europe because of the time difference.
It was, up to that time, the single most devastating stock market crash in history. And the consequences were instantaneous. The whole financial foundation of American life just dissolved overnight.
Millions of people lost everything, their life savings, their jobs, their homes. But the source adds a very specific little detail to that. It says, while millions lost their livelihoods, a few won a great deal.
And that's the core of the steering claim. In any collapse, wealth isn't really destroyed. It's just transferred. It moves from the masses holding the speculative paper assets to the few who are holding cash or gold or have shorted the market.
And the immediate result of that transfer was devastation.
Utter devastation, mass poverty, hunger, unrest. It plunged the entire world into the Great Depression of the 1930s.
And the political chaos that came out of that economic misery led to the rise of some truly awful political movements.
Exactly. The vacuum created by the Depression was filled by fascism. Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, they were all sold as the strongman solution to the chaos. But the most critical claim the source makes, the one that ties this whole story together, is that these destructive regimes in the Second World War they started were financed by the very same international banks that had caused and profited from the 1929 stock market crash.
So it's a cycle. The banks profit from the boom, they profit from the bust, and they even profit from the conflict that follows, all of it based on an unstable paper money system.
That's the picture it paints. And this leads us to a fundamental misunderstanding most people have about their own risk in a situation like this.
Which brings us to part 4, the personal cost and what the source calls the great illusion.
The illusion is this common belief that, okay, hyperinflation is bad, but there's a silver lining for regular people because their debts, their mortgage, their car loan, they also get wiped out.
Right. You can pay off your $100,000 mortgage with 1 week's salary.
And the source material is, almost aggressive in refuting this. It says this is definitively not the case. It says history proves the opposite, and it repeats this one phrase over and over. The bank always wins.
Okay, let's break that down. Let's start with the people who did everything right, the savers.
The savers, the less wealthy, they get hit the hardest.
Yeah.
Anyone with a savings account, a pension, a life insurance policy, their wealth is just annihilated by the loss of purchasing power.
But don't interest rates on savings go up to compensate?
They do. Banks will raise the interest rates they pay you. But the source is clear. They never, ever raise them enough to keep pace with the devaluation. So maybe your savings account balance goes up by 1,000% in a year, but if prices are going up 30,000% a month, your money is still being confiscated by erosion.
Okay, so savers are wiped out. Now let's tackle the supposed advantage for debtors. Why can't they just pay off their loans with worthless money?
That's the illusion. The reality is a four-part trap. First, yes, the nominal value of your debt shrinks. But at the same time, credit interest rates, especially on variable rate loans, they also skyrocket.
The banks are trying to protect themselves.
They're trying to maintain their real return. So your monthly payment burden in real terms can actually go up, not down.
And the second part of the trap is your income.
Your wages never keep pace. There's no historical example where they do. You're earning yesterday's rapidly dying money, trying to pay today's hyperinflated interest rates. It's a mathematical impossibility.
Which leads to the final awful part of the trap, the part that guarantees the bank wins.
Mass layoffs. Hyperinflationary periods always cause massive economic dislocation and unemployment. So most debtors lose their income entirely. They can't pay the loan, no matter how small it seems. And what happens then?
They lose the collateral.
The bank forecloses and takes the hard asset. The house, the apartment, the farm. The bank loses some worthless paper currency on its books, but it gains a real, tangible asset. It's perfectly positioned for the inevitable currency reform.
The source also points out a really critical hidden detail in a lot of loan agreements that people just don't know about.
This is the hidden trap.
Yeah.
People assume they have a fixed interest rate. The source uses the example of German Bausparkredit building society loans. You think your rate is capped at, say, 6%?
But it's not.
But buried in the fine print are clauses for extreme financial events. Clauses that allow that cap to be lifted. The whole legal framework is designed to protect the institution's survival, not your contract.
So if hyperinflation is the end of a currency, how does it finally stop? How does the state reset the system?
It always ends the same way. With currency reform, you replace the old, dead money with a new one. This is how the state gets its heir, as the source puts it. It wipes its own debts clean, defaults on its promises through dilution, and gets a fresh start.
And there's a huge psychological benefit to that, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. A new currency with sensible numbers on it, it generates a feeling of optimism and strength. The source points to the German economic miracle after the 1948 currency reform as a perfect example of this psychological reset.
But the lesson is that it's just a reset of the clock.
The source is very cynical about this. It argues it's only a matter of years or maybe a few decades before the debt problems build up again and the whole cycle repeats.
To really hammer home how the public pays for this, we have to look at the actual numbers from that 1948 West German reform, the conversion from the old Reichsmark to the new Deutschmark. It makes the bank always wins argument undeniable.
Let's use that specific example because the numbers are just brutal. First, your savings, cash, bank deposits. They were converted at a ratio of 100 Reichsmark down to just 6.5 Deutschmark.
So you lost 93.5% of your cash savings overnight.
Wiped out. Now, compare that to private debt, your mortgage, your loan from the bank. That was converted at a much better ratio for the bank. 10 Reichsmark of debt became 1 Deutschmark of debt.
Okay, let's make that real. Say you have a saver and a debtor. Both have 1,000 Reichsmark. One in savings, one in debt.
Right. The saver, with 1,000 RM in the bank, wakes up with 65 DM. Their wealth is gone. The debtor, who owes 1,000 RM on his house, now owes 100 DM.
So his debt was reduced by 90%. That sounds good for him.
It sounds good, but remember, his savings were also just wiped out, and he probably lost his job in the chaos leading up to the reform. So he can't pay the new 100 DM debt either, and the bank still gets the house. The saver is annihilated, the debtor loses the asset, the bank is fine. The source's conclusion is blunt. No currency reform has ever been done for the long-term benefit of the people.
That historical foundation is absolutely critical, because now we have to turn to the present. This is where the source material becomes incredibly urgent and makes some very, very strong claims.
This brings us to part 5, the current warning and the gold standard imperative. The source is insistent that the instability we see today comes directly from the lack of a monetary anchor. It's a powerful argument for gold.
And to back this up, they reach back and quote someone who might surprise a lot of people, Alan Greenspan.
Yes, the longtime Fed chairman. This is from an essay he wrote way back in 1966, long before he was in charge. And his argument then about a currency without a gold backing was stark.
What did he say?
Greenspan wrote that without a gold standard there is, and this is a direct quote, no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation.
He used the word confiscation?
He did. He didn't see it as just a market force. He saw it as a deliberate act of state confiscation, a hidden tax. Once you sever the link to gold, the state can inflate the money supply whenever it wants, devaluing everyone's savings without having to pass a single law.
And since the world fully abandoned the gold standard in the 1970s, the implication for our system today is pretty chilling.
The source claims that because we are in a pure fiat system with no hard anchor, there is no structural escape from bankruptcy for the global financial system as it currently exists. The end is already baked in.
Before we get to the really contemporary warning, let's quickly touch on the opposite of inflation, which the source is also worried about: deflation.
Right. Deflation is when prices fall and the value of your money goes up. It sounds good, but it's incredibly destructive. The source points out that inflation and deflation aren't really opposites. They're just two different symptoms of the same disease, instability. Both are the opposite of a stable, predictable system.
Okay, so now for the source's most pointed and probably most controversial contemporary warning, the claim that what's happening now has political will behind it.
This is the part that can be really hard to accept. The source claims that the current global situation, all the unprecedented spending, is steering us directly toward hyperinflation, and that this outcome is both wanted and intentional.
Wanted by who? And what evidence do they give for such an incredible claim? They mention universal money gifts.
Yeah, that's the term they use. We can interpret that as things like the massive COVID stimulus packages, quantitative easing, talk of universal basic income. It also points to what it calls senseless high expenditures by governments on projects that don't seem to have real economic value.
And the logic is that this is being done on purpose.
The argument is that the system is going to collapse under its debt load anyway. So the goal now is to accelerate the collapse, to let it happen quickly, blame it on a crisis, and clear the slate for a new system. The speed is part of the strategy.
And the source makes a specific forecast for the euro.
It does. It predicts the euro will crash, and that this crash will be the event that justifies introducing a new currency. Probably something like a central bank digital currency, a CBDC.
So the final conclusion is that all this massive uncontrolled spending we see, the trillions being pumped into the system, it's being done, as they say, hell-bent, because it's the fastest way to trigger hyperinflation. And it's no longer a question of if, but when this bubble bursts.
It forces you to look at current events, not as a series of mistakes, but as a deliberate, managed demolition of the old system to make way for a new one.
So for you, the listener, having heard this history, this claim of strategy, this warning, the source doesn't just leave you there. It challenges you directly. If this is the plan, what can you actually do about it?
It lays out a list of things you need to consider for your own wealth defense. The obvious questions: do you pull cash out of the bank? Do you buy tangible assets? Do you spend it now on travel while it still has value?
But it adds a really important historically based warning about those tangible assets, specifically precious metals.
This is a critical risk factor. The source warns that in times of extreme crisis, or during a currency reform, the state can and has, like the U.S. did in 1933, demand that citizens surrender their privately held gold and silver.
So even gold isn't perfectly safe from the state.
That possibility has to be part of your calculation, which leads to the question of what the source considers the single safest asset.
Which is?
Real estate. Specifically, the house or apartment you live in. The argument is that it's tangible, it's essential, and it's stationary. They can't easily confiscate it in the same way they can seize gold or freeze a bank account.
And on the flip side, what should you absolutely avoid investing in right now, according to this analysis?
The warning here is extremely strong. Do not invest in papers. By that they mean stocks, bonds, securities. Any financial instrument that doesn't have a solid, tangible asset behind it, they call them an empty paper with a signature from a bank.
Which brings us back full circle to the core theme of this entire deep dive.
It does. The final verdict from the source is that anything that comes from or depends on the current banking system is highly dangerous. And it repeats that one brutal mantra. The bank always wins. It uses inflation, deflation, currency reform. It doesn't matter. The system is set up for them to acquire the real assets and for the customer, for you, to be the one who bleeds.
That is a powerful and deeply researched analysis. It demands some serious thought. Let's just try to synthesize the key takeaways for the listener. I see 3 big ones. First, hyperinflation is often a deliberate state strategy for defaulting on debt. Second, when it happens, the collapse is terrifyingly fast. Remember, prices doubling every 4 days.
And third, the idea that you, as an individual debtor, will benefit is largely a myth. The system is designed for financial institutions to grab the real assets while the currency turns to dust.
And we've dug deep into the source's claim that without the discipline of something like the gold standard, our fiat system is fundamentally unstable. It's primed for a collapse that could be, according to them, intentionally triggered to clear the way for a new digital currency system.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to take away from this deep dive, something to really chew on.
If the source material is right, and the deck is already being intentionally cleared, if history shows that every reform is designed to favor the institutions, what practical, diversified steps can you actually take today to hedge against both the exponential loss of value and the potential for state confiscation?
If paper assets are a trap, and even gold is potentially vulnerable, what does a truly safe, tangible asset look like? What have real intrinsic value that can survive outside the grasp of the system? Think about the history we've discussed, the speed of that whirlpool, and ask yourself, when the whole system gets a hard reset, what defines real wealth?